Hey, Meg.
Hi, Mark.
Well, thanks for doing this.
Of course.
Coming in from Ohio, and
Yeah.
it's even on a Sunday.
It is on a Sunday.
Yep, we're getting ready for our annual retreat,
Yep.
which is so fun.
Very exciting.
But wanted to take advantage of you being in our neck of the woods.
Yes.
And this is episode number 3.
3. Okay.
Right. So first one was Jono and I got to chat, and then Chris and I got to chat, and now it's the time for the two of us. And what I'd love to do is just do a 30 minutes around your origin story, right?
Okay.
And sort of how you got on the path that you're on right now, how you've become an amazing head of people, and how you got into coaching, how you got into 90, and just sort of all of our sort of watchers and listeners, have a sense for each of us if they ever want to go back and find out a little bit more about Meg. So
Great.
Does that sound cool?
Yeah, no, super excited.
Awesome.
And excited to be here.
Yeah. So where would you love to start?
Well, it all starts, I think we can start in the simplest of terms with being fired, right? So
Chris and I talked about that
I
last
know.
episode.
And so I figured I would start with, I can talk about how I got to being fired. I can talk about, I think there's things in my life I would consider successes and everything else. But at the end of the day, being fired was a huge gift. And I'm so grateful that between being fired in one place or being furloughed elsewhere, part of the realization is if it's not a fit, you got to move on. And one of the things that's interesting as I look back, and once I've had a couple of times where I was not a fit, fired, whatever words. One of those times led me to work for a company that was implementing EOS, and I ended up being the person implementing EOS at portfolio companies is the easiest way to think about it within them.
Yeah.
And so, I'm a relatively independent human.
Yeah.
And I was like, this thing is crap. I can't believe we're going to use this system. It's not going to work. And then I ended up being a huge converter.
Yeah.
And saw the impact it had on all those companies. So I sat on the other side of being the person that implements, and that's actually part of how I got to know Chris. He was our implementer and realized the impact that it had. And, then ended up realizing it can have a huge impact. You can do so much if you can take the process, the business operating system, the process, the stuff that you don't need to be strategic at. At McKenzie, we always talked about what are you going to be uniquely strategic at? What's your strategic advantage? And an operating system is probably not it. So don't spend time on it.
Yeah.
And finding one that worked, and now being an advocate to how that has been impactful to others, and coaching has been great.
Yeah.
And on the 90 side, the part that there's so many things I'm excited about, right? Being able to grow the company and see the people and the culture expand. And it's never, there's so many people now that ask me about work from anywhere. Can it really work? Right. So we're seeing so many companies go back in person.
Yeah.
And 90 has had an unbelievably strong culture without that question.
Yeah.
So it's very possible, and it's just a matter of commitment. And I think that I think that's a big part too of our operating system and how that works, right? In person is great.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be the end all be all. And it's, I know that's a meandering answer to your question, but it's been pretty fun to get to this place.
Yeah. What I think's, if you think back on your career, right, and you think about, you and I both know Chris so well, right, and you look at his career, you look at my career, just pick the three of us. They're all very different, right?
Yeah.
But what's fascinating is how much, Chris did the corporate thing and then had the entrepreneurial experience, then did the corporate thing and had the entrepreneurial experience, right? and worked for fortunate, like he was fortunate to work for an amazing company coming out of school. I think I was fortunate to work for a pretty good company coming out of school. At the time was considered one of the best banks in the world, kind of a thing, right? But there's that. I was a bit of a misfit every single time, but I worked for some amazing organizations.
Yeah.
You've had an incredible career, in my opinion, and you've worked for some amazing organizations. And I think your origin story, without talking a little bit about all that, would do you and our watchers / listeners disservice. So, I mean, McKenzie and Bridgewater, and was it City National?
It was not. So I worked at I was a bond trader at a couple companies, but they were
and then the bank though that you
PNC.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's do a little bit of that, if you don't mind, for
Happy to do it.
us.
So my short story. So I went to Amherst College, which was at the time I went there regarded as, and I think it still is, a pretty good school.
Darn good school.
I went because I got to dive. So I was a diver, and I was captain of the swim team, and loved it, and it was great. And basically consider it as the hole in the sieve was large enough to let me through because they didn't have that many divers applying that year. But when I graduated as a psychology major, I found out very quickly that I was not so special. And so no one gave me a job. And I remember I sent 77 at the time, for those of you that remember, like Lotus Notes 1, 2, 3
Right.
and all those things. I sent all these resumes out in hard copy because there was no email really. And I got 77 rejection letters back, like hard copies, and you would paste them. The deal was you'd paste them outside your dorm rooms. And I had so many that it started to like permeate to the other people in my dorm, which was pretty fascinating. And so they all thought I was pretty strange, but a lot of people rejected me. I applied to McDonald's. McDonald's rejected me. I didn't even know it applied. Like it was, didn't even know I was trying to get a job there. I had applied to McKenzie. I applied to all these other places too, and they all summarily dismissed me. And so I ended up eventually getting a job as a secretary on a trading floor at an investment firm in Cleveland. My first day on the job, I was on the mortgage-backed security desk, so the mortgage trading desk. And I went up to my boss and I was like, when do I get to meet Fannie Mae? Because she sounds awfully important. And the guy legitimately went to the other intern and is like, take her away and teach her something before I fire her. So fortunately, I learned enough to know that Fannie, Freddie, and Ginny are like all friends, and I shouldn't ask about them. And I always say, if you don't know what I'm talking about before you go to any financial institution, you should go ask. And within a year, I got to trade my own book of business. So I studied a lot. I learned a lot. And then I started the arms desk at that company, and 30-year collateral and 15-year collateral. So I was trading bonds. And so the story goes that I am part of the reason for the 2008 financial crisis. So apologies, because I traded the instruments that caused that to go down. But I learned a lot, and it was great. And then I traded a couple other places. I did in corporates and taxable munis, and I learned a ton about financial instruments and loved it. And it was great. And it's such a cool concept.
Right.
But it's extremely transactional, right? My biggest problem was 15 minutes. The bond market moved, or the treasuries moved, or whatever it was, and my problem went away.
Right.
And so I was getting my CFA, so a chartered financial analyst, and passed my first exam. I was studying for my second, and it's a pretty big deal. It's the equivalent of an MBA in the financial world.
Yep.
And decided that was not what I wanted to do. So I applied to business school, and I ended up going to business school. So I went to Dartmouth, and didn't quite know what I wanted to do, and realized that the one upside about consulting is that they will let you learn what you want to do and pay you at the same time. And so after Tuck, I went to McKenzie and did a number of years there. And what I learned about at McKenzie is that everything I learned about talent management, I learned while studying for my CFA. There is nothing different about talent that there is about finances. It's just a different asset. and they're people and they're human, and being a psychology major on the trading floor was wonderful because last time I checked, financial markets are not logical, they're emotional.
Yeah.
And so the same thing happens with business. And I got very passionate about like every client and service I ever did at McKenzie. The perspective was if you could understand the people and the assets better, that's what worked. And so I had started a couple things at McKenzie. One of the things I was most proud of is we did a big project on how do you motivate the front line? Like how do you take like this big mission and get the front line to buy into it? And that was really about connecting to a vision and understanding the systems behind the vision. And we did that in multiple industries, organizations, and it worked out to really give me a different perspective. And that was wonderful. And so did that. And then
was that effort kind of like a really sophisticated version of something that's taught within sort of EOS and other BOSs
it's
like that?
It's actually very similar. So McKenzie uses different frameworks and models. It's called the influence model. There's other parts, but it's very similar, right? You have to have a mission and a vision everyone holds. You have to have, and so that's one part. There's another part around like you have to reinforce it, like the scorecard, like what measures get done. Like it's a very similar concept.
Right.
And then you have to train people. They have to understand what it is, like the process and the piece. They have to be supported.
Right.
The one thing that's interesting, and it's not necessarily explicit in the EOS world, but I think we believe it within 90, is role modeling.
Right.
So if you don't role model the behaviors you expect everybody to exceed, like you can't have a leader saying, I'm going to do something different than everybody else, because then it doesn't reinforce it.
Yeah.
And so I think that how we incorporate role modeling is such a key part of like what has made 90 so impressive, right? That everybody is humble and operates in the same way. So, but that would to me, like that's really also the other element that we really learned is that you take this very difficult concept, you simplify it, and you take it to the front line, and that is the key, right? Like that, it's about making sure everybody understands the broader goal.
Do you think that what EOS tries to do in terms of really emphasizing the importance of defining and living your core values, do you think that goes, sort of the beauty of EOS is it's like there's 6 big ideas that are made as simple as humanly possible, but not so simple that they fall apart. Mm-hmm. So do you think EOS addresses it with core values for the most part?
I think it's 2 places it addresses it. The core values is one.
Yeah.
And I think the purpose, cause, passion.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And the mission and the vision. And why are you getting up every day?
Right.
And I think that ends up being very important, right? Like, why are we doing what we're doing? When done well, so if you think about it, people go work at a nonprofit all the time.
All the time.
Right? And we know that people pay less at a nonprofit. And it's because they're so connected to a mission, a vision. Like, so there's this perspective around that actually really does have a value. And the more we can reinforce it and ensure everything's connected to it, the better off.
Right. The reality is that not only do people go work for not-for-profits, right, but there are people who volunteer for not-for-profits, right, to show you that, a purpose, passion, and/or just cause ultimately can be extraordinarily rewarding in and of itself, right?
Yep.
I'm going to do a quick tangent on it. It reminds me of one of my clients that I had years and years ago. When I was teaching what EOS calls LMA, right? So lead and manage, and if you do that well, right, people hold themselves accountable. And part of that exercise or that teaching includes Napoleon Bonaparte's famous quote and which I'll paraphrase because I haven't done it in years now, no one would give their life up for any amount of money, but they'll gladly do so for a little bit of yellow ribbon, right? And I had one client years and years ago who thought that meant that he could underpay people and take advantage of people, right? And it's like, well, no, you can't quite do it, right? This purpose, passion, and just cause is there to capture, the soul,
right?
But if people think you're taking advantage of it, it completely annihilates all that.
Right. Well, because then, and that to me goes to that part of role modeling.
Yeah.
If you're gonna do that and you do it for yourself, like if you are clearly not taking everything, like if you're putting a certain percentage, like whatever it is, like that's the whole, if we're all in it together, people are all in it together, but you can't have one person being special and not everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah. So McKenzie.
Oh, McKenzie.
Yeah.
I left McKenzie.
And you really do at McKenzie. If my memory serves me well, right? You really got into you were sort of like an expert there on talent.
Yep. So I switched. I decided, because of my client base, like I was decided that the one thing I knew that my successful clients were the ones that took care of their humans, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their human assets, their human capital, their people. And so I switched to being an organizational expert. So I moved into the org practice, was there for a number of years, and decided then, one of the things we all learn, and anybody that has dealt with people in business knows, you can talk conceptually about something, but until you actually have to go implement it with people, it's very different.
Yeah.
And so I decided I really needed to go try it and implement it.
Yeah.
And so I was the chief learning officer at a bank called National City that got acquired by PNC.
Right. That's where I got the National City in my head. Yep.
Yes, because of, again, my mortgage bond trading, we didn't make it. And so therefore I had to, in fact, a number of the people that I traded bonds with were there. That ended up being a fun little circle.
Yeah.
And then I ended up getting a big job at PNC, which PNC bought National City, and I became their chief talent. Like I ran talent for them.
Yeah.
And moved and loved, and they were great. So I think we got 400,000 applications a year at PNC.
Wow.
And we hired 30,000 people a year. Like it was a machine.
How many employees?
We were 60,000 employees, but when you add up like call centers and tellers and turnover, like the number of people it was a machine, right? Like when you add it up.
Yeah.
And at the time, like it was, it was fascinating, right? Like, loved it. It was great. But for what I wanted to do, probably wasn't as entrepreneur, like all the great reasons you should have your money at PNC, or all the reasons I probably am not a good long-term fit.
Right. But it's interesting too, because, in college psychology, right? And then you go and do the bond trading thing, right? And then you get back into the talent thing. But obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but clearly that interest in psychology and interest in humans and why we do the things that we do. And because I presume, I shouldn't say, my instincts are that many of the people that get into psychology, sort of have an inherent interest in trying to help people, become better versions of themselves, sort of deal with things that are hard to deal with, and so sort of just very people-centric humans.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I was a chemistry major until I failed Orgo, and so that didn't work out so well for me. But psychology, to your point, I think that was much more my interest, and loved it. And so I went to and so I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
And which is why actually in the end, when I decided to leave PNC, I had 2 job offers, and one was at Google to run leadership development for them, and then like an element of leadership development for them. This was way back when. And then at Bridgewater, so a hedge fund out in Connecticut. And
just a little small hedge fund out in Connecticut.
It's a Ray Dalio's very large hedge fund. And I remember like very vividly deciding that like that was a big decision. I was going to have to move no matter what. And I had 2 kids. I'm the breadwinner, and picked Bridgewater because I really do believe that the philosophy that Ray Dalio has, and I agree with it, is like at the end of the day, putting the right people on the team is the most important part. Like he would argue that's how he's been so successful. It's the people on his team. It's the people processes that have led him to have such success on the investment side.
Yeah.
And so as both an investment professional and a people professional, like there's no better place. And so that's how I ended up at Bridgewater, and did that for a number of years. And again, great place, fascinating place.
Yeah.
Lots of things I think that we take from there. Like we're very, I think at 90, we're very principle driven. We start at the principles and what does that mean versus just the the specifics. And I think a lot of companies jump to like the policy versus the principle behind the policy. And I think that taught me a lot of like the logic of how we choose.
Right.
And so that was wonderful.
Well, and I think one of the things, you and I have talked about this probably numerous times over the years. I've had a huge amount of respect for Bridgewater and its principles. I don't always agree with Ray on everything.
Nope.
And I think one of the conversations you and I've had is how some of even Bridgewater's sort of best practices, for lack of a better term, have evolved. Mm-hmm. And like the radical transparency thing. On the one hand, we're huge about transparency here at 90. We're
very much.
But we're also hugely into trying to help people become the best versions of themselves.
Correct.
Right? Better and better versions of the best version of themselves. It's literally one of our core values. And so, one of the things that Bridgewater did, or at least I want to use the term tolerated, perhaps, right, was sort of just brutal transparency as opposed to thoughtful transparency. But I think it's like that's a thing that it's even evolved on, right?
Yeah, and so before I joined Bridgewater, like I had been interviewed a couple different times before I eventually decided to come on. And empathy is now, at least when I was there, was a trait.
Right.
It used to not be. So that was to your point, that's one of the things, like empathy. And I think one of the questions you always have, like I'm a big believer of you should be upfront and honest and transparent and help people, but for the greater good of the individual.
Right.
So if somebody is already in a horrible situation and they're not going to hear the feedback you're going to give them,
right.
Kicking them while they're down, not
right.
helpful.
Right.
Hiding, also not helpful.
Right.
But delaying 2 days, okay.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing magic about that moment. And
right.
I feel like that's part of finding that happy balance of like, if you're really, the intent is we're going to make people better, and by making people better, we make communities better and companies better, and that's our bigger vision, right?
Yeah.
That's humane, right?
Yeah.
Like that's one of the things I love about us is we're humane, and
right.
we always, that of all the things we've ever talked about, like I get some people hate that terminology sometimes, but I love it. Like
yeah.
we start with humane, right?
Yeah.
Like that's how you are going to be resilient and productive and great, and that to me is a core of who we are.
Yeah. When Chris and I did our first podcast together, he started off with sharing something that is not easy for people in business to share with one another, but that was the idea that he loves me, and because we've bonded over
yeah.
things, and we care about one another and care about all the same things, and I'm going to throw back at you. I know you've heard me say this on numerous occasions, but I'm now 40 plus years into my career, and you are without question the most amazing people person I've ever met, head of people, and
I might cry.
I know I've shared this with you.
I know you, but it's hard. I'm very appreciative.
But I think that the journey we take,
yeah,
right, there's meaning to it all, right? And like I shared with Chris, Chris shared with me, I think he was fired at least once, if not twice. I've been threatened to be fired or fired by every single company I've worked for. I know you've had your ups and downs, but part of what I want people to understand is we all go through this.
Yeah.
But if we lean into listening and understanding the moment and what we're supposed to be learning, those things are gifts. I agree. And it's 100%. Funny because Chris talks about we either win or learn, and he knows I've said, well, maybe it's we either win or get a gift, right? And I think gifts in some regards makes learning even better, right? Because they're gifts in that they give us something that we didn't have before, right? And so when I with your journey, from all the way from the bond desk to McKenzie, to PNC, to Bridgewater, I think that whole journey that you've had has made you, extraordinary, right? And I think the other part of it is that you and I, when we first started chatting about all this, we were on the same page in terms of, sort of the extraordinarily productive, humane, and resilient, and really trying to figure out how we could help people really understand what's working, what's not working, how to help people have great conversations so that we can help people become better and better versions of the best version of themselves. We've been around amazing organizations.
Yes.
Right. I mean, I worked for, Chris McMaster's, which was, extraordinary organization in my opinion. You've got Bridgewater, McKenzie, PNC, great organizations. I've worked with some great organizations, and so we've had a chance to see, really super effective people. But I also think, what we've also seen is that you can be great, but you could be so much greater if you sort of really understand the human.
Yeah.
Right. And I would go so far as to say that, one of the things that we share is, if you can create a culture where everybody genuinely cares, and they care about all the, I say, ideal stakeholders, because I don't, if there's someone who's a bad customer and they treat one of our people poorly, we don't care about that.
I agree.
I'm sorry, but when people genuinely care about all the ideal stakeholders, when they genuinely care about their colleagues, and they genuinely care about our customers, and they genuinely care about our investors, because we're all investors, it's pretty incredible.
It's extremely incredible, right? Like it's people spend more time at work than they do anywhere else, right? And the fact that I think 90 and you've created a company, and I'm just grateful to get to help you and the whole group, where we have unbelievably close relationships with people, right? We're coming here to Snowbird.
Yeah.
I think I'm trying to remember the number of people, 70 people, probably maybe more than that have never met each other individually.
Yeah.
The connections that they would say, I bet you if we were to do a test, the number of people that say I have a best friend at work, which is a great Gallup question.
Yeah.
I think we've not done that Gallup test. I think we would have 100%. Yeah. Right? And it's done not because we're sitting in the water cooler, but we genuinely believe in what we do, and everyone is committed to a mission and a vision, and I mean, that's
and they're there for
great.
One another.
They're
right?
there for one another, right?
It's I was looking at the Slacks this morning, right? And, and how it was Chris's team, right? The partnership team is just they're all so excited to be together again, right? And it's just it's palpable.
There's a huge connection, right? I look at my people team and the back and forth in Slack on so-and-so has a sick kid. I know more about what's going on in their life than I would if I was in the same office building.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
interesting, isn't that?
But because you have to set it up so that there's space to do that. You
Yeah.
have to set up there's ways to do it. So everybody that tells me you can't have close relationships in a work from anywhere organization, I think is full of it.
Yeah.
That's my 2 cents. And I think there's lots of more ways we can continue to grow it, but I'm excited to be a role model.
Yeah. That's right. So segue in, segue out is a thing.
Yes.
Right? Anything you want to?
I think in terms of both and I think we just touched on it there, is, I would share two thoughts. Both one is for anybody that has been fired or has a failure in their life. I love your perspective. It's not a learn, it's a gift.
Yeah.
Right. And we talk about it all the time. When you go to work out, it's not comfortable. If you're sore, you're growing.
Right.
It's the same thing in business. And so if we can think about those and lean into them, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
And I think the second piece, I guess, as a segue out is you can create any environment you want as a leader, but you have to role model whatever you want. Right. So if you aren't willing to do the tough things, if you aren't willing to lean into the tough things or role model the tough things, including somebody has a bad day, pick up the phone, call them.
Right.
It doesn't have to be bigger than that, but don't think somebody else is going to do it. It doesn't take more than a sentence, but you got to do it.
Right.
that makes all the difference in the world. And I think that's one of the things you've shown all of us.
Yeah. Well, we're, as Chris and I talked about, I think I love where we are. I know there's tremendous amount of work to be done in so many ways. We all know that in order to sort of get to where we think we've gotten to the point where we're doing the kind of work that we know we can do.
Yeah.
But, ultimately, it sounds, everybody says it's all about people, but I don't think that most people actually really think as much as they should, especially leaders, about the people. And so, we're super lucky to have the world's most amazing head of people, and appreciate having this time with you.
Thank you. I'd make one last statement if I'm allowed, which is, we didn't talk a little bit about, I went from very large companies now to small PE-backed firms.
Yeah.
And I would say the one thing that I think we all have to remember is that is the core of our economy.
Yes.
Large Fortune 500s, Fortune 100s, whoever they are.
Right.
Yeah, they're super successful, but that's not what drives our economy. And so if every single one of us can think about like the startups, the small companies, and making them successful, that's what, and I think that's really the core, and they are so underserved.
Yeah.
So the fact that that's what we get to do every day is really empowering.
Yeah. Well, I 1,000% agree with you. I think the lifeblood of a healthy society is small and mid-sized businesses, because good news, bad news, they're completely subjected to open positive and negative feedback loops, and they're not leaning into regulators. They're not leaning into lobbyists. They're They're the ones that, and all companies start there, right?
That's right.
Google is small, Apple is small, et cetera. And so, I deeply love supporting the small and mid-sized business community.
Yeah. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.